It made a lot of news a few days back when the President of the United States announced that he was not going to carry forward with the missile shield in Poland and Eastern Europe. I honestly don't think it crossed his mind that he made that announcement on the 70th anniversary of the occupation of Poland. But it did cross the minds of a lot of Polish people, especially the Lutherans in Poland. There's a fascinating story that arises from that Soviet occupation. For some reason, which I still find hard to get my mind around, the Soviets were absolutely bound and determined to wipe out religion in the Soviet Union. Marxism declared religion the opiate of the people. It needed to be gone. It was of no use, of no help, and they weren't just willing to let it die on the vine. They decided they had to wipe it out. So they arrested and deported to the Gulag all of the pastors of churches. They even went so far as to separate men from their wives and to carry the men off, I suppose, to labor camps or what have you. Charles Colson told the story of this in his book. They confiscated all the Bibles, all the prayer books, all the hymnals, all the religious works, and the Lutheran women were left behind with not a whole lot except their children. I expect the Soviets thought they had put a stop to the end of this nonsense in Poland. Now, I don't know what they did to the other Christians in Poland. All I know is because of Charles Colson told this story, what the Lutherans did. As it happens over the years, the Polish Lutherans had memorized a lot of scriptures, some on purpose, some just from repeated reading. I'll bet you right now that a lot of us could sit down and if we started thinking, we could recite from memory any number of things we've read in the Bible, favorite scriptures, things that really got imprinted on our mind. They say that everything that goes into your mind stays there forever and never leaves. It's like a closet you can never clean out. I think that's true. And so they all sat down and got together, shared what they knew, and they began to write out everything that they could remember of the scripture, of their liturgy, of their hymns, and so forth. They shared it all. They managed to create an abridged version of the Bible, but one with enough to carry the faith through those hard times. When the Soviet Union fell and the men returned, they found the Lutheran Church had not died in Poland. And you really have to stand and salute those women for the work they did in keeping their faith alive. How is this relevant to us? My wife, who's with us this morning, most of you know, we had an accident coming down here, and she's had a little longer time recovering from it than I had. But she had a speech planned that she was going to give to the YEA teachers at the beginning of this feast. It included this example of the Polish women. And she wasn't able to give it, but she gave it to Paula Hughes, who read it to the teachers who assembled on that day. And it's relevant in some very interesting ways. As many of you know, there was a theory in our tradition that the English-speaking peoples were actually Israel of the latter days, and that the prophecies that appeared to refer to Israel in the latter days were applied to the English-speaking people, including a coming captivity. I dare say there are quite a few of you people here will remember that vividly as far as the way that was taught. We are Israel, and one of these days, because of our sins, we're going to go into captivity just like Israel of old did. It had happened in history. The Assyrians were among the very first, I think they may have been the first, who really practiced wholesale deportation of people from one kingdom to another. It was the Israelites of the northern kingdom that the Assyrians moved out into Assyria and beyond and replaced with people from other captured lands. And as far-fetched as it may seem, the Nazis carried out a massive captivity of Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, and others, anybody who criticized them, into slave labor camps and sometimes even to annihilation camps, and they wound up killing millions of people. Jews, gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, all that came to pass there. Now, I will confess, I never really could imagine how such a thing could happen here. I knew it, I'd heard about it, I struggled with it, I couldn't imagine it. But my wife, Allie, in her planned speech to the teachers, spoke of some different outcomes, and I thought it might be worth recounting to you here. Here is what she wrote about the example of the Polish women. Why am I telling you this? There are important lessons for us in what happened to the Polish people. Right now, today, it may never have crossed your mind that we could go into captivity or that our nation might be occupied by a foreign power or that a rogue power from within could take away our freedom. In no way am I trying to predict that's going to happen, but a nation going into captivity or being occupied by a foreign power is not exactly unanticipated or unprecedented. So these events should give us food for thought. At the beginning of nations forming, there have been wars, nations have fallen. People have been taken into captivity and carried away. Foreign governments have occupied other countries. You will recall that Israel was held captive more than once. Have you ever wondered why? We're much more likely to think the U.S. is too powerful and immune to be taken into captivity or being occupied by a foreign power or a rogue power from within. At a time of prosperity that our nation is still experiencing in spite of everything, it's difficult for us to think in those terms. And then she went on to say, let's just consider one chapter in the Bible, Deuteronomy 28. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now, this is relevant in some interesting ways. Many of you know this theory among our people about Israel, but the question that arose in my mind when I was reading through what she wrote was, a rogue power from within. How would that work? Well, I understand that all too well. Some of you may remember two programs we finally released. I don't think they have actually aired yet, but they have been announced to people who are on our mailing list, and I think the MP3 links have been up so people can listen to them. They were programs titled Opposing Evil 1 and Opposing Evil 2. It's one of the clearest examples of how this can happen to a country, happened to Germany in the first quarter of the last century, and the story is of crucial importance. By the way, just out of curiosity, how many of us in this room today were born before 1940? You people will be more than likely be among those who will remember this best. You've probably paid more attention, and even though you may not remember the events that took place, because it was in your life, you probably have read about them, and you may be more aware than some others have. Now, I've heard of people puzzled, and I've puzzled myself, over how it's possible that the Germans of that era could possibly have allowed a man like Adolf Hitler to come to such absolute power, not just come to power, but to absolute power over the German people. Strange as it may seem, it may be for some of the same reasons that I discussed in another radio program recently, how freedom is lost. And I know that one's in our radio archives. You can listen to it there. I knew of the great intellectual and artistic accomplishments of the German people. I knew about their great universities. Do you know how old some of those universities are? The first of the great German universities was Heidelberg, probably the best known because of the musical that has to do with it. The University of Heidelberg was established in the year 1386. University of Leipzig, 1409. University of Rostock, 1419. University of Greifswald, 1456. University of Freiburg, 1457. University of Munich, 1472. University of Mainz, 1477. University of Tübingen, 1477. Universities were popping up like mushrooms in a wet season in Germany in those days. The intellectual power of the nation was, frankly, I think probably without parallel anywhere else in the world. Maybe some other European nations comparable to population would have done something similar. But did any of those dates register on you? Did anything come to mind as I was reading them? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We all learned that to memorize it for school. It was in 1492, after 8 of the greatest universities in the world of the time had been established in Germany. In 1492, Columbus set sail from Spain and discovered a new world nobody even knew existed, the one that has become our country. It was in 1517 that Luther nailed his 95 theses to the door of a great cathedral. It was in the early 1700s that Bach was turning out some of the greatest music anyone has ever heard, then or now. In the late 1700s, Beethoven, that's astonishing man, was at his peak in the late 1700s. And America, we were just figuring out who we were and what we stood for at that particular point in time. The great universities in Germany were already over 300 years old. So let us not think somehow that we are better than the Germans and could never make the mistake that the Germans made. That's why I am telling you all of this. Here's the burning question today for us and the Germans to consider. How could a nation like Germany produce an Adolf Hitler? I think maybe it's fair to say that Germany didn't produce Hitler. After all, Hitler was an Austrian. He didn't look like a German. He didn't look Nordic. There are even some people who think that he was Jewish and hated his Jewishness. Germany became vulnerable through European wars, and by the time the First World War was over, the people were dispirited, defeated, craving leadership of almost any kind. True, the years that followed the war were desperate for many Germans. The economy was crushed. Hyperinflation made the currency worthless. You may not know this, but actually Germany was recovering from all these before Hitler came to power. They were actually beginning to pull themselves out of the hole. But the nation had been so traumatized by it. They were so painfully aware of what they'd just been through, where you needed a wheelbarrow to carry enough money to the store to buy a loaf of bread. I think that's an exaggeration, but I've heard it so many times. How could this possibly have happened to an intelligent and accomplished people? I would never have believed it was possible in this country, but I'm being forced to reconsider. The Spartacus group in England published a paper that said some things about this time. I think we need to listen to them and think carefully about what they said. The hostility toward Jews increased in Nazi Germany. This was reflected in the decision by many shops and restaurants not to serve the Jewish population. Placards saying, "Jews are not admitted," and "Jews enter this place at their own risk," began to appear all over Germany. In some parts of the country, Jews were banned from public parks and swimming pools and public transports. The Jehovah's Witnesses were also persecuted in Germany as they refused to do military service. Nazis also hated Jehovah's Witnesses because they believed in the imminent return of a Messiah. The rejection of this, that this was not Adolf Hitler, led to its members being sent to Germany's concentration camps. I hope you were listening. I hope you got what I just said. The Jehovah's Witnesses were sent off to concentration camps because they believed in an imminent return of a Messiah, and they didn't believe Hitler was it. That was their big crime, that and refusing to do military service in the army of Germany. And here is the thing I want us to think carefully about today. Leaders of the Protestant and Catholic churches remained silent through this period. The main opposition to Hitler came from a group of young pastors led by Martin Niemöller, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Heinrich Gruber. Initially, the main complaint was the decision by Adolf Hitler to appoint Ludwig Müller, the country's Reich Bishop of the Protestant Church. Imagine, you got a dictator up here, and while he's not doing away with religion, he is appointing a Nazi as the head of the church. I can't get my mind around that. Would we put up with that in this country? I wouldn't have thought so. That was a new one for me. I knew Constantine did it. I did not realize until I read it in this paper that Hitler had done the same thing. With the support of Karl Barth, who was a professor of theology at Bonn University, in May 1934, these rebel pastors formed what became known as the Confessional Church. Over the next few years, hundreds of these pastors were sent to concentration camps, and some were executed. One wonders what the outcome would have been from the start if Christians had been able, with one voice, to oppose the actions of the Nazi regime right from the get-go. But they didn't. They were down, they were dispirited, they were divided, and they were afraid. What we need to bring to the fore is a clarity of vision, and that only comes from a really strong stand on the principles of the Bible. Let me say that again. We need a clarity of vision that only comes from a strong stand on the principles of the Bible. Not just knowing about them, but standing for them. And I think we also need to remember that if you're looking around expecting Jews to be persecuted as a part of the picture that we've seen in the past, there are other groups of people who are weak or powerless, who are just as vulnerable, and it may be a whole different approach to things. We have got to have a broader view of that and must not put the blinders on. Now, we aren't without manifestations of charismatic madness even among Christian people. And that's the kind of thing that began to happen in that world. Christians are as suggestible as anybody to that kind of mania, and it arises from the same sort of need in people. A need for leadership, a need for direction, a desire for a strong hand from somewhere to come and take command. That was the thing that a lot of Europeans were wanting in the 1920s. I can see us doing the same thing. Do an internet search on progressive Christianity, and you may see what I'm driving at. I certainly was surprised. I had never heard of it. I read about it somewhere and went and looked, so I will just commend that to you. But Allie, in her speech, made reference to Deuteronomy 28, and I think it'd be a good thing for us to go there right now. Deuteronomy, especially chapter 28, is not exactly a prophecy per se, not in the conventional sense of the word. Think of Deuteronomy 28 as a cause and effect statement, a statement of causes and a statement of the effects that will follow on those causes. It isn't pointed at Israel alone, it's pointed at people. And it is simply saying, this set of actions that I'm asking you to follow will be the cause of this result. You follow another set of actions, they will be the cause of a different result. Not complicated, and really not hard to understand at all. Listen to how Deuteronomy 28 begins. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you on high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. Now that's a simple statement, isn't it? How clean does it have to be? Obey the Lord your God, keep his commandments carefully, be diligent in doing this, and these blessings will come upon you and accompany you. Now, one of the things we really need to disabuse ourselves of is the idea, the image of God at the console, where here's God sitting in his office chair with a big console in front of him, a video screen, where he can look at the whole world at any one time and everything that's going on he can see. And he sees something he doesn't like, he reaches out and presses a button and makes something bad happen. He sees something he likes, he reaches over and presses a button and makes something good happen. Gary Larson in The Far Side had a cartoon I'll never forget all my born days. I can't find it. I'd like to have it in my screensaver. But he had an image of a God like that, white-haired, long-haired, beard, and so forth, sitting there. And on his right hand was a very large button, about like that said, smite. And this is the image that sometimes we carry with us. But that's not what Deuteronomy 28 is saying is going to happen. What it's going to say is, here is a way of life that you will live, and if you live it, the result will be this. The blessings will come upon you, and they will walk along with you wherever you go, if you just do things this way. Okay, Deuteronomy 28, verse 3. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed. The crops of your land, the young of your livestock, the calves of your herd, the lambs of your flocks, your basket, your kneading trough, all will be blessed. You will be blessed when you come in, you will be blessed when you go out. Now, how's that for a way to live? And God seems to be saying here, if you will just live my way, I won't have to do anything. These things will follow you. They'll come upon you. They'll catch up with you, and they'll be a part of your life. The Lord will grant that your enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. They will come at you from one direction, but boy, they're going to flee in seven. That's just the way it's going to be. The Lord will send a blessing on your barns, everything you put your hand to. The Lord your God will bless you in the land he has given you. This is amazing. It just goes on and on. It even says you will lend to many nations and will not have to borrow from them. I think that's a fascinating comparison to the world we live in today. The Lord will make you the head and not the tail. If you pay attention to the commands of the Lord your God that I give you this day and carefully follow them, you will always be at the top. You will never be at the bottom. Do not turn aside from any of the commands I give you today to the right or the left, and don't, whatever you do, follow any other gods to serve them. You need to be single-minded. You need to have a lifestyle that matches the law of God. You need to make your decisions in life informed, with a conscience informed by the law of God. Man, folks, you live that way, and life is going to work for you as far as anything that you're trying to do is concerned. I've read this so many times, included in so many sermons. It's an old familiar friend, this scripture is. And I've come to a firm conclusion that one of two things has to be true. Because if you look at the land we're living in today, well, let me put it to you this way. One of two things has to be true. Either the British Israel people are right, and the English-speaking people are tribes of Israel upon whom the blessings of Abraham have come, or the founders of this country got an awful lot of things right, or both. The truth is that in our founding, this was a very different people than the people we see today around us. And because nearly everyone knew the Bible, because nearly everyone at one level or another feared God, that God's law, through English common law, had a profound influence on our Constitution and the structure of law in this country. And candidly, as the years went by, our nation looked an awful lot like those first verses of Deuteronomy 8:28, didn't we? I mean, we go out and some armies would come against us one way, and by the time we got through with them, they were fleeing 7 ways. That seemed to hold up all the way through Pearl Harbor and all the way to VJ Day, didn't it? It was tough. A lot of men died. A lot of very brave heroes died. But nevertheless, we were able to win out over them in that time. Now, either one of these alternatives gives some people heartburn, but that's how it is, folks. One or the other of these ideas pretty well got to be true, because the blessings that came upon this nation up until recent generations have been astonishing when you look at them in comparison with the history of the rest of the world. Now let's take a quick look at the other side of the coin. Deuteronomy 28, verse 15, because this is part and parcel of this statement. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I'm giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Now here we are, we're trudging onward through the wilderness, we're fighting hard to win, and right on our heels we can feel the hot breath of evil coming behind us. He says these things, here's what's coming, they're going to come upon you and to overtake you. Now, at this point, it's really important that you banish this idea of God at the console from your mind. God does not have to push the smite button. God does not have to push the plague button. He doesn't have to press the drought button. None of these things are required of him at all. Nature and our enemies and our adversaries will take care of all of that if God just doesn't stop them. So realize what he's saying here is not anything except if you go down this road, there are 2 ways ahead of you, my way and the highway. And you go down the highway, and you're going to find out you can't run fast enough to stay ahead of these things. Here's what is coming. Now, in this section, we are faced with exactly the obverse. You can start and read it from this point on. You'll get just the reverse of all the things we said before. But come down to verse 43. This one is kind of interesting in today's world. The alien who lives among you will rise above you higher and higher, and you will get lower and lower. He will lend to you, you will not lend to him. He will be the head, and you will be the tail. You know, I remember a colleague of mine years and years ago, when the Watts riots came in Los Angeles, was saying that he was appealing to this scripture. Well, yeah, I suppose so, but that's just peanuts compared, I think, what that situation was to what's coming ahead. And it isn't really race. It's culture. And the heathen who are among us, the aliens who are among us, whose culture are not ours and who refuse to adopt ours, they're going to get higher and we're going to get lower. The people who founded this country, the culture of the founders of America, is going to disintegrate, it looks like. All these curses will come upon you. They will pursue you. They will overtake you until you are destroyed. Why? Because you did not obey the Lord your God and observe the commandments and the decrees he gave you. How hard is this to understand? Two ways of life. One that brings blessings, one that brings cursings, and it's inevitable. It's not a question of somebody making a decision. You are making the decision by the road you choose to walk. And as a country, we are making the decision because we can't divorce ourselves from it. Just because we're Christian, just because we're here today and we're keeping the Feast of Tabernacles and bunches of other people are not, we are still a part of we in this country. And we'd better not forget it. They will be a sign and a wonder to you and your descendants forever. Why? Because you did not serve the Lord your God joyfully and gladly in the time of prosperity. My word, how prosperous can a country get? They're the poorest among us on a world scale, are rich as Croesus. How could we ever get beyond that? He said, you didn't, but when it was that way, you did not serve the Lord your God joyfully and gladly. So, as I said to you last year, I can see God turning to an angel and saying, well, prosperity didn't work. Let's try poverty for a while. And that's basically what happens here. Because you did this, you will suffer hunger and thirst. You'll serve in nakedness and dire poverty. You will serve the enemies the Lord sent against you. He will put an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. Now, come on, folks. Are we prepared to accept the possibility? Because we have year after year, generation after generation, forgotten God, running him out of the schools, leaving him out of our lives as a people, that we're going to be just fine and we're just going to go on to greater and greater things. It would be to do that, to think we could do that, would be to say that God had absolutely nothing to do with the wealth that came our way. Did it all ourselves. We did this. God didn't do it. Now, bear in mind, God does not have to press a button on his console to make it happen. There will always be enemies. As we become morally bankrupt, weaker as a people, the blessings bleed away, and the weeds grow up and take over, and God doesn't have to do a thing. And like the German people, the time can come when we will lack the will to stand against what is coming. I'm sorry, I have a feeling that we are getting extremely close to that in our nation today. Historically, we turn to God in times of adversity, and we forget all about him in times of prosperity. I don't think the adversity we have coming on us now is nearly enough to get the people's attention in this country. I'm coming to think that statements like the one I just read, the Lord will send your enemies against you, I'm beginning to look at those things as a figure of speech. Because, in fact, God doesn't have to do anything. All he has to do is not do anything. Let it happen. Because we will always have enemies who will come upon us. We'll always have disasters that will strike us. And we have no right to ask for God to get in the way and to protect us or to do anything on our behalf. If you have the presence of mind to see it, this stuff is going on all around us right now. That list of things, go read it. Take it home with you tonight. Give it a reading when you've got some time to think about your reading, and you're going to realize where we are on these two roads. We took a wrong turn a long time ago, and we're a long way down the wrong road. How are we going to get back? I don't know. I think it's going to take an act of God to bring us back. I want you to consider what Allie had to say as she opened her speech to the teachers with these remarks. She said, "There's never been a time in the history when a nation has experienced such prosperity as ours. But at a time of great affluency, we are a poorly dressed nation. Never in my lifetime have I seen a people so rich, at the same time so poorly and inappropriately dressed for anything." Now, she didn't put that in there. I'm putting it in there. For anything. It may be their best friend's wedding. Who knows what it is? But I have to agree, I've never seen anything quite like it. I was born in the Great Depression. Even though many people were hungry, they still seemed to have a sense of propriety. Of course they did. They knew what was important. They knew how hard it was going to be to put meals on the table for their children. Of course they did know what was important. They knew what was appropriate to wear to church, to work, to funerals, to weddings, and on the street. They did the best they could. When a farmer was seen in town with holes in the knees of his jeans or overalls, it was because he had worn them out. He certainly didn't buy his overalls with holes in the knees. He wasn't trying to rebel against society nor make some kind of fashion statement. He did it because he couldn't afford to buy a new pair of overalls. It was that simple. But clothes, inappropriately dressed people, are only a symptom of a greater problem in our society. And she was absolutely right. It's not the point. It is merely a symptom of something that is badly wrong with us. And, you know, it's funny, our condominium has full-length wall mirrors in it. And every time I come out of the bedroom, I am reminded of how old I am. Painfully. Anyway, there is a natural rebellion between generations. It's expressed in what was commonly called the terrible twos. I know you've all heard, all parents have heard of that in any case. The child is beginning to recognize him or herself as a separate, independent being. Not really independent, but they don't know that yet. They are considering and understanding themselves, I have wishes, I have desires that I want to get done, and they begin to try to exert that. Something similar to that happens at a different level when young people enter their teens. Once again, they start seeing themselves differently, and they begin to make certain demands. They expect a certain liberty and freedom that they really aren't quite ready to do yet. They are in the mood to declare their independence. Another phase happens when they enter college. I am now free to get drunk and make an ass of myself. I think y'all know what I'm talking about. Some of you would be able to wear the t-shirt that says, "Been there, did that." Still another example occurs as careers develop. If we are lucky, we have mentors that help us grow, develop, and advance in our careers. I certainly did, and it's meant a lot to me. But inevitably, young people reach the point where they must be their own person. I read an article about years ago, and it called this the boom years. Becoming one's own man. I experienced that because I came to the place to where I knew things that my old mentor didn't know. I had to make decisions with a different set of parameters from the ones that he thought were important, and so I started making decisions different from what he would have made if he'd had the choice to make them. It ruptured our friendship. It ruptured it because he couldn't let go. If we're lucky, we'll have mentors that help us advance. And if we're still more lucky, we'll have a mentor who knows when to let go. The friendship can only be preserved if the mentor lets go. And I've seen that happen too, where the mentor has let go The guy's done some stupid things, got himself in trouble, and I've watched the mentor sit there and roll his eyes and say nothing. If he'd been asked, he could have told him. But the young man had come to the place to where, well, I know what I want to do. I know what needs to be done, and I'm going to do it. Hey, that's a part of life, and you get to take the bruises that come with it. Be my guest. Feel free. Okay. We have, if we have any hope of turning things around in this country, the hope lies with what I call Generation Z. We have had the baby boomers, then we've had Generation X, then we have, I think, Generation Y starting to show up, and coming up next is going to be Generation Z. If Generation Z follows the patterns of previous generations and rebels against the slovenliness, the sluttiness, the ugliness of this generation, they might turn some things around. The natural human rebellion could save our bacon. The problem they face, though, is gravity. That is the pull of the world around us that tends toward degeneration, not regeneration. In science, they call it entropy. And it is there, it is always there, and it is something we always have to fight about against. It has to be met with energy, persistence, drive, and determination. And problem is, I think we are becoming a people who are short in those capacities. Regeneration requires an enormous amount of energy that's got to come from somewhere. And there may be a terrible irony in that Z is the last letter of the alphabet. Now, to those of you who may form Generation Y or Generation Z, I have this to tell you. The society around you is a degenerating culture. Science even has found this thing to be true everywhere. Everything degenerates. Everything falls apart. Everything goes to hell. It requires a real determination to prevent that from happening. Now, I am fearful that the time is coming, as we go down through this period of time, this tendency to degeneration is not only affecting the nation, it is also affecting the church. To reverse it, there's a huge denial necessary, a self-denial, a huge increase in sacrifice, a major input of energy and personal sacrifice is going to be required of every one of us to reverse this trend, either in society or in the church. As for your role in the faith, you may have to find completely new ways to evangelize, young folks. I am fearful the time that's coming, I don't know how far ahead it is, I'm afraid it won't be long, when the kind of work that I am doing will be shut down. I am doing what I can to adapt to the new media, but I can't afford to neglect the media that I've been given to work with and I'm gifted to work with. That's my job. Somebody out here is going to have a different job. And because it's in people in power to want to shut down the people who disagree with them. And to the degree to which power has corrupted any administration, any government, and any people, the degree to which power has corrupted is the degree to which they are willing to go to shut people up. And it seems evident, a lot of people are afraid of this, that they're going to try to shut down talk radio. They're talking about getting control over the internet, and I have no idea. I know what Hitler would have done. I know what Stalin would have done. I know what Mao would have done. I know what the communist Chinese today would try to do. I can't imagine it in this country, but neither could the Germans of 1900 imagine what lay shortly in their future. Now, as I said, I'm going to do what I can to adapt. I'd like to remind young people that CEM has an ongoing intern program. We're willing to take young people who are going to come down and work with us and learn how a ministry operates and work with you. We cannot pay professional salaries for this. You'd be lucky to get enough to get by. But we can offer a learning experience you can't get anywhere else. We can offer access to me. We can offer access to a radio studio. We can offer access to technology, to computers, to the internet. And we want someone who will think day and night about what we can do, how we can do it, what we can accomplish. You want people who, when they get in the shower in the morning and are washing their hair and scrubbing their armpits, who are sitting there thinking and suddenly realize, I've been in the shower a long time because I've been solving a problem in my mind. And they come out of that and write it down, and then they go to work and they see if we can't find a way. I want people who think about it in bed. I want people who wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, who take their bath thinking about it, who eat their meals thinking about it. It's the sort of thing I've done for years. And I don't expect any less of anyone who thinks they're going to be useful in God's work. If you're interested in our intern program, send me your resume, or talk to me, or talk to Larry Watkins, and we can talk about the opportunity. And I'm going to say something else. If you're too old for this nonsense, but you'd like to sponsor an intern, be sure and let us know. Because sometimes we would do something, but we can't afford to do it. We'll do our best to find a way, and I just wanted you to know this is a program we have. It's a program we intend to continue, and right now, that job is open. One of the more hopeful things I see are that the members of Generation X are increasing. I was sitting in the back, for convenience sake, and I was struck by the number of children who have to be carried in and out of this place. I asked Janae, the head usher out here, if I was just my imagination or if that's the way it was. She said, oh no, there are a lot more babies this year than there have been before. Wonder why that is. I asked somebody else about it, and he kind of related it to what happened a year ago in the nation. And I guess when people are lonely and are hurting and they're scared, they cling to each other a little bit more, and when you cling to each other a lot more, things happen. A word to the churches. As a church, listen carefully, as a church, there is nothing you are doing that is more important than bringing our children up in the faith with a strong and broad knowledge of the Bible. Let me say it again, so you want to be sure you get it. As a church, there is nothing you are doing that's more important than bringing the kids up in the faith with a broad, strong knowledge of the Bible, so if they had to, they could all put their heads together and put together enough to live by if the Bibles were taken away. That's a challenge, isn't it? A word to the families. Now, write this down. I want to be sure you get it, although it'll be available to you on tape. There is nothing you are doing as a family that is more important than bringing your children up in the faith with a strong, broad knowledge of the Bible. Exactly the same goal. So family, church, you name it, that's the job that lies ahead of us. The generation that is being carried around in this room, and I've been watching them coming and going. One of the fascinating things back here as you watch kids going through is that the little boys in particular seem prone to do this. There are metal plates in the carpet back there, and they seem compelled to have to put their foot on one or the other of those, or both of them if they possibly can. That generation may be the generation that saves a nation. We depend on them. They're the ones who are going to have to save our bacon. They might be the last generation, on the other hand, of a formerly great civilization and a great people. I am not a prophet. I cannot see the future. I don't need to see the future very much because I can see the past. And I can see that marvelous statement of cause and effect that we read in Deuteronomy 28, which really tells you the whole story if you have the wit to see it. I'm an optimistic person by nature. Anybody who's known me for many years will know that I tend to see the glasses half full, not half empty. So when I say I am pessimistic about the future, you might want to take notice. I've been around a long time, seen a lot of stuff, read about it, studied it, and thought about it. I am not very optimistic about the future of our country. As I sit in the back of the room and watch you carry and lead your kids in and out, I am struck by the fact that it may be their generation that produces the next wave of real prophets. It may be from that group of kids going back and forth that the next Isaiah or Jeremiah emerges. Because I have a strong feeling that since the Lord will do nothing except he reveals his secret to his servants, the prophets, that we're going to have another Isaiah and another Jeremiah, and we all know we're going to get another Elijah someday, and I'm going to be very, very suspicious of anybody who makes that claim. Here's my point. See that you teach these children well. If they get a chance, your own life may hang in the balance of what they do. Teach them well.